Hello and welcome to episode 19 of the LiveFitNow Podcast. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you are well. I cannot wait for you to hear today's conversation. As always, I am very excited for you to listen to today's guest. It is an Australian lady who takes adventuring in her stride and will share not only her own personal experiences, but I think inspire so many of us, whatever our age, to start adventuring. So without further ado, I'm going to leave you with the conversation. Today's guest is the founder of the wildly inspiring community, and today I look forward to discussing with her her very own adventures. Welcome to the LiveFitNow podcast, Stephanie Hunt. How are you today?
Good, thanks. Thanks so much for having me.
Oh, you're so welcome. So I would just love to have a little bit of background about you, really. What is it that you do, and what does health, fitness and adventuring mean to you?
Well, I'll start with the end first. Adventure is my life, and it's interspersed by periods of work, really, that allow me to continue to travel and adventure. I'm a community engagement manager for a plantation forest grower. That's my day job. And I'm also growing a community of adventurers, ordinary and extraordinary people who, like to do more than just sit around and watch Netflix, which a lot of us are doing during COVID-19 times. But most of the time, people who like to get outside and see the great outdoors and adventure.
Wow, that's amazing. It's a forest grower. Is that literally what it sounds like, the job?
Yeah, so we grow pine trees, both species that are native to Australia and exotic species, and they're mostly used for structural timber for homes and buildings. Some of our timber is used for laminate and ply for landscaping features and things like that. Most of our timber is sold domestically, so people can be living in a home that was built from timber from the plantations that they live just down the road from.
Oh wow, that's amazing. So you really do love to be around nature, even with your work.
I'm really fortunate with my job that I work for a forest grower, and I work in the Glasshouse Mountains, which is a really stunning landscape of volcanic plugs as well. So I'm very lucky to work for the company I work for and in the location that I work.
Wow, sounds like somewhere I need to put on my list of places to visit.
Yeah, look it
awesome.
up. Look it up.
Yeah.
Glasshouse Mountains. They're really beautiful.
So what gave you the wildlife bug? What started your adventuring?
We always travelled a lot when I was a kid. I have two younger brothers, and my mum grew up in the country in Western New South Wales in Australia. And we used to travel out to the farm where she grew up a lot when I was little. And then we spent 6 months living on an airfield in a small country town in New South Wales. And then my dad became a pilot, and we flew across Australia and flew around Australia. We used to drive a lot as well, and so we were just always constantly travelling. And every Christmas we spent 3 weeks at a little seaside town where we lived on the fish we caught, and that's just travelling and that type of thing. I've taken that into my adulthood and tried to pass it on to my own child.
That's amazing. I think once you start young, it's almost, you can't get rid of it, can you?
So once you've experienced that kind of freedom and self-sufficiency, it really does stick with you.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. And the reason we connected was you told me about a hike that you did, and it was 4,000 kilometers or 2,500 miles on the Pacific Crest Trail from Mexico to Canada. Now, it sounds like quite a challenge. When did you do it? Why did you do it? And what was it like?
I did it in 2018. Why is a more difficult question. I've always wanted to do something epic. I've done quite a lot of travel and solo travel, and bought and lived on a yacht for a few years with my son and things, but I never felt like I really expressed myself as an adventurer, I guess. And even though a lot of people do this, and by some people's yardstick. It's highly adventurous, and by others, it's relatively tame. It's an established trail that runs from the US Mexico border, and runs up through the high desert, and then through the Sierra, and then the Cascade Mountains, through California, Oregon, and Washington, and then just over the border and into Canada. So the whole trail's about 4,250 kilometres, or 2,650 miles. There were quite a lot of fires and a lot of smoke when I did the trail, so there are some small sections of the trail that I missed due to that and a couple of other reasons, but I completed about 4,000 kilometres of the trail.
Wow. How long did it take you?
It took me 155 days.
That is quite a commitment.
I requested a leave of absence for work, and moved out of the place where I was living so that I could really reduce all my expenses. It is a time commitment. I only decided to go 4.5 months before I left, and in that time I had to up my training game and then make all the logistical preparation, get my visa and my permits and that kind of thing. And with your training background and things you'd appreciate, I got plantar fasciitis about 3 weeks before I left, and I was crippled. I couldn't walk at all before I went. And I spoke to my osteopath maybe 5 days, my last appointment before I went. And I said, do you think I'm mad? Do you think I'm really going to be able to do this? Or do you think I shouldn't go with this injury? And she said, I think you can do it. And so I went, and even driving to the trail, I still wasn't sure if I was going to be able to hike. I hadn't been able to hike for very long with the pain, and I saw it through. It was painful at times, but I made it.
That was my next question. How painful was it? But you managed to do it. You were obviously so determined. And what was it that when you decided 4.5 months? What was the thing that made you decide, that's it, I'm going for it now, I'm just going to do it?
I had, in 2015, I had a work opportunity in Western Australia, and I joined a hiking group over there. And one of the women in that hiking group who I hadn't met was hiking the Pacific Crest Trail at the time. And so I was following her travel and was just amazed by how spectacularly beautiful it is. And also not just the beauty, but, what an exciting sort of social opportunity, I guess. And at the same time, around the same time, the movie Wild came out with Reese Witherspoon, which also features mainly her personal journey, but also her hike on part of the Pacific Crest Trail. So when Rebecca came back from her trip, she did a talk with photos and unpacked her pack and things. And I knew then and there I wanted to do it. I just wasn't sure when. I certainly couldn't do it at that particular time. And I moved into a new job shortly afterwards. And I thought, well, that's 3 or 4 years before I'll be able to take time off. And then on Facebook, I was following, they have class of pages for each year. So people planning to hike next year would be in the PCT class of 2021. And I was following each year's class, and I just, as it came time, the permits come out each year, and on one day, it was one day then, now it's 2 days a year now. And I thought, I really want to go. And so I had a very difficult conversation with my boss. I hadn't been in the job much more than 18 months when I asked for 6 months off. So I was very lucky, and he said yes. And so I started planning.
It's been a very exciting time. Do you think you were so busy with the planning that you didn't really have a chance to think about it too much almost?
In a way, part of your planning is upping your hiking game. I went from hiking, sort of once every couple of weeks to hiking 3 or 4 times a week, before work, after work, on my weekends. And so you have plenty of time to think while you're hiking. So you do have time to think about it and contemplate what you're doing, but you are really busy as well. There is a lot to get organised logistically to make sure you've got all your gear, to work out what you're going to do about food, which is a little bit harder for international travellers because you can't easily prepare food and send your own resupplies. You're more dependent on what you can get over there.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I was going through all of those sorts of things in my head and worried about lots of things. Was I going to be fit enough? I was an overweight woman approaching 50, and you have doubts about whether you can make it, and not just whether you can make it physically, but you know that it's not always going to be exciting the whole time, and whether or not you can cope with the mental shifts that you have, whether you'll meet other people or not. So there's a lot going through your head, and whether you'll like it. You like hiking for a day or 3 days or a week. When you go and hike something like the Overland Track in Tasmania, which is about 60 or 70 kilometres, and it's just spectacularly beautiful the whole way. You think, well, nothing can be beautiful for over 4,000 kilometres. So, what am I going to do for those days and weeks when it's boring? Am I going to be able to hack it?
Yeah. I kind of want to paint an image. Are you rocking up to the beginning of that trail, just you and a big backpack with all your stuff in? Or do you have a car for some of it? Like how do the logistics work?
Well, for me and for many other hikers, the logistics involve a trail angel. So often there are people who are called trail angels who provide services to hikers, usually for free, and just because they love to support you on your journey. So I was very fortunate. A wonderful woman, Judy, who lives near San Diego, she picked me up from the railway station. I took a train from Los Angeles down to San Diego, and she took me to her place, and from there I had an opportunity to sort of buy my supplies and things, and then she drove me to the trailhead. But once you get to the trailhead, it's you and your backpack and your tent, your sleeping bag and your food, and then you're on your own after that. You do run into other trail angels who in order to purchase more food as you go, because obviously you can't carry 6 months worth of food with you, you'll hitchhike into town and people will stop and give you a lift and might offer you accommodation and things like that in those little towns near the trail that you stop at to resupply. And they crop up every sort of 4 to 7 days, sometimes 10 days, depending on the stretch. But aside from that, it's just you and what you're carrying.
And were you by yourself most of the time, or were you walking with other hikers?
So I started the trail solo. Most hikers who do the PCT start as solo hikers, but very quickly you meet some people, and some you gravitate to more than others. And that could be because you're just hiking at the same pace, and so you're constantly running into the same people, or it could just be people that you really take a liking to. And so you find yourself running into them multiple times throughout the day, but most of the time you're hiking on your own. But if you stop for a break, someone might hike by you, or you might hike by them while they're taking a break. And then often there are limited places to camp. And so there are apps that show you where there are places to collect water and places to camp. And so you'll choose one of those that you think is a good distance for you for the day. And then when you arrive there, you'll find other people that you probably already know who are set up. And after the first sort of week or two, you start to develop this one group that you move mostly with. And you might, either up your hiking game or slow down a little bit to try and stay with that group. And they become your hiking family, which is known as your trail family or tramily. And so I found a tramily quite quickly, developed a tramily quite quickly. And we hiked the first 700 miles together, which is the distance of the desert. But over time, some of them became faster, some of them slower, some dropped away. And by the time I reached the Sierra, my tramily sadly had disintegrated. And after that, I mostly hiked fully alone. I went some periods a week without seeing, and I went 5 or 6 days one time without seeing anybody, another human being at all. And other times I sort of met up with 1 or 2 people and hiked with those people for a little stretch, but was mostly on my own.
And how was that? Did you get lonely, or did you enjoy the solitude?
A little column A, a little of column B. I really struggled after my family all went their separate ways. And that was the period where I skipped a section of the trail. I skipped the Sierra initially, not with the intention of not doing it at all. But when I arrived there, the conditions were beyond my experience and I thought my comfort level. And so I decided to skip past the snowy conditions in the Sierra, keep hiking north, and then at a later date come back and hike that section that I missed. So when I got back on the trail north of the Sierra, there weren't many hikers ahead of me. I did have one friend in front. Some other hikers went further north and started heading south, and I passed them. But I did really struggle for a while then. That was one of my hardest periods of time on the trail, where I wondered what I was doing, why I was doing it. Was it really selfish or indulgent to be doing it? Had I, should I be doing the best of several different trails instead of just one really long trail, which had, better sections and sections that weren't as enjoyable? And it wasn't that wasn't a pretty section of the trail or an interesting section of the trail. It was just the mind space that I was in that stage. But I got past that and sort of really redeveloped my love for it. And then after that, hiking on my own, I wasn't really lonely. But there was that one, I had one really difficult week mentally. I did decide later to quit the trail, but that wasn't for quite the same reasons, and I didn't quit. But even though I made the decision to quit.
What was for you the biggest challenge of the entire experience?
Without a doubt, the pain in my foot. So a lot of people have plantar fasciitis and they get up and their foot's a little stiff and sore, and then they sort of walk it out and they're fine for the rest of the day. Every footstep for me was like having a knife driven up through my heel. And managing that pain was really difficult. I ended up really increasing my ibuprofen intake, probably beyond a safe level. I didn't develop a stomach ulcer or anything like that, but I was uncomfortable with the amount of ibuprofen I was taking. There's a joke, hikers call it vitamin I. And so, it is something that hikers generally depend on. But I had some miserable days. I had some times where I was almost in tears with the pain or really irritable from the pain. I was able to forget about it at times as well, but it never left me the entire trail.
How long did it take you to recover from that after you'd finished?
It took another year, maybe a little bit longer, for the plantar fasciitis to go away. So I really dealt with it for a long time. And when I got back from hiking the PCT, I did another hike here in Australia that I don't know, took about five days maybe. A couple of months later, and a few months after that, I did another 7 or 8 day hike, and I still had plantar fasciitis then as well. But as soon as I got back, I stopped taking the ibuprofen, and that was possibly one of the reasons why the pain lasted as long as it did.
Yeah, these things really do take time, don't they? So you mentioned before how you trained for the challenge, that it was hiking. Is it simply you hike get ready for hiking, or do you do any other sort of training, sort of cross training to get you fit and ready?
You're right. The best training for hiking is hiking, particularly hiking with your pack, and ideally in the same sort of terrain that you'll be hiking in for a hike, like I was preparing for. There's another school of thought, though, that says that, you're starting in the desert. It's comparatively flat. It's not flat by Australian standards, I don't think, because there are still some big climbs, and you're still hiking up over high desert mountains and down into valleys and things, but it's not as, the elevation gain and loss isn't as hardcore as the Sierra or the Cascade Mountains. And it starts out relatively straightforward and gets harder. So you do have time to develop fitness on the trail. But I was very fortunate to have the advice of a friend of mine who runs the Adventure-thon events here in Australia. Used to be a personal trainer who I trained with, and he helped me set up a schedule. So I did a long hike each week with my pack. I did a short, fast hike before work, initially without a pack, and then in the last sort of month or 6 weeks with my pack. I also did hill repeats. So I didn't have anywhere where you can do sustained hiking for uphill for hours on end that was nearby. So there was just an area where there was a fairly steepish hill, and I'd hit that after work and do, sort of 45 minutes of repeats up the hill as, sort of hard as I could. I didn't do those with my pack. And I did go to the gym as well. So I did 2 sessions a week at the gym, and then I did another bodyweight session at home that he set out the program for me for those. And I did find those really beneficial as well. But it is important that you practice with the gear, with the pack that you'll be carrying, with the shoes that you plan to be wearing, and making sure that, sort of that system all works together, carrying the weight that you plan to carry. And I was studying, and I did park runs on Saturday morning. So the park run near where I lived is the second toughest park run in the world.
Oh, really?
And,
wow.
I think it's a trail run, and it's I think they measure its difficulty by the times, because the times for the 5K are substantially longer than the quicker courses. And I think they also measure it by the number of injuries. And
wow.
And so I do 2 laps of that. I do one lap with the park runners, and then I do a second lap, and it had some really steep hills in it as well. And, you're pushing to improve your time. So that was another, sort of fast. So I was on my feet 4 times a week, and then in the gym or doing the bodyweight exercises 3 times a week. I had 1 day completely off, and it was perfect. It was exactly the right amount of training. The one mistake I made was my friend told me not to run, even though I was starting to run some of the sections, and because he wanted to minimize injury, and I followed his instructions on that. But I know I once trained and ran a marathon, and I remember the training from that about never increasing your training distances by more than 10% a week. And so that was my plan for my hiking as well. And because particularly when you really up your training game so soon before you're going to depart, you are just constantly thinking about don't get injured, don't get injured, don't get injured. One of my training hikes I did a couple of 4-day hikes in those 4.5 months. So I did 3 of them, I think, leading up to leaving. And on the last one, which was 6 weeks before I was due to go, I ended up combining 2 days as 1 day. I knew that there was some rain coming. I wasn't really loving it. It was hot and humid, and there wasn't a lot of vistas to see. And so I thought, I'm just going to slam this and get back to the car and go before this rain comes. And so I increased my hiking distance by about 11 kilometres longer than my longest hike that I'd been training for so far, and with my pack. And that was the day I got plantar fasciitis. And so, it just goes to show it really is important, if you've got a training program, to stick to your program. It's really important to increase incrementally and just really take care of yourself, because injuries, there are several things that end a long distance hike, or a through hike they're called, and injuries is usually the biggest one. Running out of money is one, and injuries is the other. And really, really fit people, I met really fit people on the trail, and some of them go down really early with hike ending injuries.
Yeah, I mean, it's impressive you still managed to make it, and you really learnt that lesson the hard way, didn't you? So you're definitely someone to listen to. Don't push yourself too far, too fast. Take your time.
Well, I would suggest that less training is better than getting injured in training, because you do have time on not all hikes start out as gently as the Pacific Crest Trail does, but you do have time to acquire your fitness on the trail, as long as you then pay attention and take it easy that way as well. I mean, some training obviously is optimal, but not getting injured training is even more important.
Yeah. Is there anywhere on the trail that you would like to return to one day, or if you tick that off and you're happy to leave it behind you?
No, I'd love to do the whole trail again, actually. I'd be, you often think about where else would you like to do a long distance trail, because most of us, once we've done one, want to do more. In fact, most of us finish thinking that we don't want to stop hiking. You want to be over, and you never want it to be over at the same time. It's those last few weeks, it's a funny feeling. And while there are lots of other places that I'd love to go and do a long distance hike, I would really love to go back and hike that whole trail again. And there are definitely sections I'd like to return to. There were some sections where the scenery is really spectacular, but I couldn't see it because of the smoke. There are some sections, there's a section that I missed, and I couldn't go into Yosemite Valley. It's not part of the Pacific Crest Trail, but you can hike there from the Pacific Crest Trail. But it was closed for the first time in history, modern history, due to the fires. So I'd really like to be able to go back there and hike in Yosemite as well. But really, more than anything, I'd love to hike the whole trail again.
That's amazing. Even with the pain, maybe you go back without any issues next time.
Oh goodness, the things you would. It would be lovely to go back without any pain, and I was a fairly slow hiker. I did good. I kept my mileage up well, but I was slow in terms of my hourly pace. So I often spent more hours hiking each day than other hikers who were doing similar distances to me. I'd like to go back as a faster hiker.
Sounds like a great goal. So this is the main thing that we began this discussion on, but what other amazing stories have you got to tell? What other challenges have you taken on? Is it always hiking, or are there other things?
No, definitely other things. The first big adventure I had, I was going to say as an adult, but really I was still a kid. I left school very young. I finished school young, and I was working for a chartered accounting firm while I was studying at university. And I decided to go on a 2-week tour of the New Zealand ski fields. And I was only 17, and I loved that so much. I came back and I quit my job and quit uni. I had 3 weeks to save $400. In fact, most of that was given to me, buy a backpack, a sleeping bag and a one-way ticket. And I left again on my 18th birthday. So that trip was quite exciting. I went back to New Zealand. I went to Europe. I went to Japan, Korea, and went cycling in China, backpacking and cycling. And that was in 1987. And I was, not long after I came back from there, I became a young mum a few years later, but I was able to do a semester of university. I enrolled at uni when I was pregnant, and my second last semester of university I spent studying in the UK. And we had a couple of months in Europe just driving around. We did 20,000 kilometres in Europe in a little Volkswagen Polo, Europe and Eastern Europe, just me and my son. He was 2 at the time. So that was quite exciting. Wow. We did some other travel when he was a little bit older. We did some sailing in Croatia, and we went to Borneo. And I know I've missed Corsica. So we went scuba diving in Corsica. But when he was 9, we bought a yacht. I'd never been sailing. Not never been sailing. I'd never really sailed before. I'd been on a couple of other people's boats and just really loved the lifestyle. So I bought a yacht and we went sailing for 2.5 years when he was 9, 10 and 11, just the two of us up and down the Queensland coast. And that was an incredible experience. I really, really loved that and loved that lifestyle. If I could do something for the rest of my life, it would be to live on a boat and sail around the world. I unfortunately lost all my investments during the global financial crisis, so my plan for my early retirement has gone out the window, and so I'm not living the life right now that I expected to be living, but trying to make up for it in other ways, like the Pacific Crest Trail hike. And in 2013 and 14 I spent 15 months driving around parts of Australia in a van with my dogs and my mountain bike and my kayak. So, yeah, different things at different times.
Yeah, different opportunities have been presented to you, I guess. And I'm assuming, based on all those wonderful stories you've just sort of touched upon, I'm guessing your son is an adventurer now as well?
Well, my son and I, in that regard, are quite different. He's quite risk averse, but he ended up spending 3 months in New Zealand when he turned 21. That was my gift to him, and he hiked a lot of the great trails, the great walks over there. And when he returned, he became a gemologist, and so he's done some travel on his own now to meet miners in mountains of countries like Vietnam, to negotiate with them to purchase gemstones, and he cuts and polishes those for customers, and his work's really, really spectacular. But during the course of all that, he was dating a lovely lady who lived overseas, and so he took quite a few trips to visit her and things. So he's sort of growing into his own adventures now as well. But we're quite different personality-wise in that regard, in terms of risk. So.
Interesting.
But he's very supportive of me.
Oh, that's good.
The things that I like to do. So my whole family is, and I'm really lucky in that regard, because you read people on Facebook pages, for example, saying, I really want to hike this, but my family says I can't go, or I shouldn't go, or it's not safe. And from the questions that some people ask, that people have put ideas in their heads that this is not something that can be done safely.
Yeah, it can really put you off, can't it? It is great to have the support. And what have you got left on your bucket list to do? Have you got some ideas?
Oh my gosh, so many ideas. There's still parts of Australia I haven't seen. I'd love to spend more time travelling Australia, probably mostly by road, given the size of our country. I'm doing a 3-week road trip next week into parts of far western, northwestern Queensland, where I haven't been before. And I'd still love to sail around the world. I see that as being, like a 7-year adventure. I'm not interested in doing it as a non-stop voyage like the people who sort of do solo circumnavigations or race around the world do. There are many, many other long distance hikes I'd like to do. I'm quite interested in doing some long distance paddling. I used to do a lot of mountain bike riding, and I've done some riding in New Zealand and that sort of thing. I'd like to revive that and do some more mountain bike riding as well. I'm sure my adventure days aren't finished. It's just a question of working out how to fund it all, really. And it's difficult I like the longer self-propelled adventures, and it's difficult to do those with 4 weeks annual leave a year. I'm supposed to be in Uganda right now, trekking with to see the gorillas and the chimpanzees, and walking safaris and things. But unfortunately, COVID-19 has put paid to that. But adventures, definitely part of my future.
It's part of your life, isn't it? You can really, really sense that from you. It's amazing. No, it's good. I think you might just inspire people to push themselves out of their comfort zone, which I think is so important.
Well, thank you. I hope so. It's when I did my hike, my PCT hike, a lot of people wrote to me and said how inspiring they found it, and those comments came from some really unexpected places. I had a friend who'd recently suffered a traumatic brain injury who said that she was unable to do anything really. We used to mountain bike together, and she said that, following what I was doing was sort of really important for her recovery. And another friend of mine, a new friend, had breast cancer at the time, and it that had really changed her life. And she said that she was really traveling through me at the time, and I was really touched by not just the stories and the journeys that they were going through at the time, but how much they valued what I was doing. I'd never really, I knew that people, sort of thought, oh, people often say, oh, you're really brave to do that. I don't think of it as being brave, but, so I knew people were, impressed is not the right word, but I didn't realise that it actually made a difference to people that I was doing it. And that did really move me. And that's one of the reasons why I've started Wildly Inspiring Community, which is just a Facebook group, but is developing into a podcast. When I get back from my trip, I'll start publishing some podcast episodes. And hopefully that will really help change people's lives, whether it's to inspire them to do something that they're in a position to do right now, or whether it's to help people through difficult times that they're going through and can't do those things for themselves right now. So,
what was the purpose of setting it up? Was it to meet other people, other like-minded people, or what was the reason you thought, right, yeah, I'm going to launch this group to try and connect?
Look, you've probably worked out by now I don't really have good reasons for doing anything that I do. It's just something that I felt like it was a good idea at the time. I wanted people to have a place to talk about the exciting things that they're doing. I wanted people to see the scope of opportunities that were available to them, and some of the places that people post where they've been and what they've done there. And it just really opens up your eyes that you've barely scratched the surface yourself as a traveler or an explorer or an adventurer. Sometimes you think what you've done is really out there, and it really isn't compared to something that somebody else is doing, or it's an opportunity to bring people along who want to do something like what you've done before, but they're not quite sure how to go about it, or what equipment they need, or how much training they need to have done to be in a good position to do it safely and stay healthy and injury-free. It's just and because of COVID-19 at the moment, most of us aren't traveling very much. A lot of our adventures are on hold, and so we're just sharing things that we've done in the past that we really loved, and other people sort of jump in and ask for more information and put it on their own bucket lists. So it can be whatever people want it to be.
Yeah, that's lovely, isn't it? As you say, I think there is so much out there in the world that there are things and places that you've got no idea exists, but then when you talk to other people that like to do similar things, you start to open new doors, and I guess you can plan ahead for that. And do you help other people plan and get ready? So if someone says, right, I'm going to do the PCT, you give them sort of all your tips and advice from your experience?
Oh, absolutely. If anyone's welcome to contact me at any time, and I'll provide whatever advice I can. I also stay fairly active on different PCT pages. When there are Australians who have indicated that they want to do the PCT, sometimes we've connected by phone afterwards, or we've met up in person. I'm happy to talk about the gear I used and the experience I had with it. I think almost everyone who participates in a hike like this or an experience like this pays it forward by helping other people. I've done some talks as well, and presentations about the hike also.
You can really sense it's an important part of your life, isn't it? Going and challenging yourself and seeing different parts of the world.
It is. And, it's funny, it's been about 12 months since my last big trip, which was to the Northern Territory. And I'm really struggling. I've been really been feeling really bored, like I'm really in a rut. I was really looking forward to going to Uganda, and ever since March, it was really unclear about what would happen and became increasingly unlikely. And because that was such a big trip, and I, was really saving hard to go, I wasn't doing a lot of other things in the meantime. And whereas normally I'd have mini adventures and things like that in between big adventures. And so this trip that I'm going on next week, which there's some hiking and some camping and some car camping and a few days paddling and things. It's going to be really great. I'm visiting a number of gorges and waterfalls in some remote and not so remote parts of Queensland. And I'm really excited about this trip because I feel like it's going to be, like a vitamin injection to my soul.
I know, I can see that 2020 is certainly one we're not going to forget.
I think you're right there.
So obviously you stepped your training up before your big adventures, but do you always maintain a certain level of fitness? Do you have focus when you train, or do you just go with how you feel?
I just go with how I feel. My approach to training is pretty terrible. You'd be really disappointed in me. I wax and wane. My interests change all the time, so I'll be mountain biking a lot for a period of time, or hiking a lot for a period of time, or paddling a lot for a period of time. I've got a stand-up paddleboard that I enjoy getting out on, and I have dogs. One of them's just come to say hello to me now. And I take them for beach walks and things like that. Since the PCT, I came back from the PCT hike, and on the one hand, I was feeling the fittest I've felt in my life. On the other hand, I was also a bit weary, but I let someone convince me that joining F45 gyms was a good idea. I don't know if you have F45.
Yeah, we do. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. And I did that, and oh my God, it broke me. I hurt myself. Not that it wasn't not just my back that was hurt, not just my foot that was sore, but I hurt my back as well. And so I ended up not doing much in the way of exercise at all. I was trying to stay off my feet, and unfortunately, my back injuries really stayed with me. These, so it's been over 18 months now, and so the last 18 months has probably been the least healthy 18 months of my life, other than fitting in a few other long distance. I've done 3, not long distance hikes, but 3 sort of 1 week hikes since then. But I'm working with a holistic practitioner at the moment, to try and sort of deal with some of these inflammation issues and get my health and fitness back on track. It's a difficult position for me to be in, and it's really a high priority now for me to fix it, because I feel like I can't take advantages of something, or if an opportunity was to present itself right now, I wouldn't just be able to drop everything and go, and I don't like being in that situation.
Yeah, you need that strong foundation so that you can push yourself in which direction you need to take.
Yeah, and I was just ready to go back to the gym again, and when COVID-19 shut all the gyms down, I know that sounds like it was an excuse, but I really was ready. And our gyms here just opened up again about 2 weeks ago to smaller numbers. There was a bit of a rush at first, so I thought I'll just let that pass, and I'm ready to. I'll do my 3-week trip now. And I'll come back from that, I know, feeling really motivated and energized, and so yeah, I'm and I probably need to work with a personal trainer for that, level of accountability, and also just to make sure that I don't go a bit nuts and try to do too much.
Build yourself up, so. Yeah. It's very important. So gradually get that consistency, and then you'll feel great.
Yeah, and it's one of those things, when you don't have it, it's hard to get back, but once you're in it, you can't imagine not doing it. So I'd like to get back to that.
Yeah, I so often say to people, it's actually that the first step really is the hardest, and once you've taken that first leap, don't get me wrong, the hard work is still to come, but it's the first one that's really difficult to take. But once you've taken it, you will definitely feel great.
You're absolutely right, and in fact that relates to the sort of adventures that I do as well, because people often say to me, like when I lived on the yacht or hiking the PCT, oh my God, I'd love to do that. And I go, do you know, the only difference between you and me and doing that is a decision. And that's all it is, because once you make the decision and then you back yourself, you make all the things happen that have to happen between making the decision and taking the first step.
I love that you just said that, because one of my previous episodes was one of my clients who over last Christmas, he was part of a team that rowed across the Atlantic Ocean, and he said the
I
exact
listened to
same
that
thing.
podcast this morning.
Ah! So yeah, exactly, Kevin. And he said the exact same thing. And I love that, because it is true. People always say, oh, it's all right for you, or, however they want to phrase it. But the truth is, we're all just people, and we can all just decide to do something if we want to. We just got to give it a go.
And it's also the scale of your commitment. So, in order to buy the yacht, I sold my house. I took my son out of school and homeschooled him. And so it's being willing to do the things that you need to do it as well. But it starts with a decision. I met other people who are able to fund their adventures in different ways. So it doesn't mean that anyone who wants to do something has to do something as dramatic as sell their house. But saying, I can't do this, I can't afford to do this, isn't always really true. It's whether or not you're willing to prioritize things to make that happen. And I have never been a wealthy person. I live paycheck to paycheck. And so really, it's not money that's the obstacle usually to adventures. It's commitment.
Yeah, the commitment and the desire to figure out a way of making it happen.
Absolutely.
I don't think anything like this lands on your lap generally, does it? You have to actually make a conscious effort to figure out how to make it happen.
Absolutely. And, I was just listening to a podcast with an Australian sailor. Her name's Lisa Blair, and she did a circumnavigation of Antarctica, and she was talking about the steps that I don't think she knew at the time what her adventure was going to be, but she decided to join the Clipper race around the world. It's a series of stages, and it's really expensive to buy a berth on each stage. And for her to do the full circumnavigation with the Clipper race, I think was an $80,000 investment. She didn't have $80,000, and she fundraised for it. So, there are all different ways to access the money in order to take a trip if you're willing to put in the hard yards to do it.
Yeah, just go for it. So I have a question that I like to ask everybody. What inspires you?
I'm really inspired by nature. And even though I value the relationships, and particularly the relationships I make in natural environments and traveling, I love being places where you feel really small and alone. So you can be connected and still feel, and it's not, I don't mean alone as in lonely, but that makes you feel like you're insignificant. And whether you're hiking on the Pacific Crest Trail or you're on a yacht on the ocean, you really, really discover just how insignificant you are in the big scheme of things. And there's something that's actually really powerful about that. So while some people might think feeling insignificant makes you feel less powerful, I feel it's the other way around. And but of course, other people's journeys really inspire me as well. I really like doing something that pushes me. I like doing something that I don't know if I'm going to be able to do it or not. The first time I sailed on my own, I didn't know if I could do it or I couldn't. That first step on the Pacific Crest Trail, I didn't know if I'd last a day, a week, a month, or whether I'd make it all the way through. And even from day to day, sometimes hiking on the trail, I didn't know if I had what it took to finish. There's something I like about that as well.
Yeah, I really like that. And it's a really interesting thing you say about sort of feeling insignificant. And I guess one of the reasons it's so powerful is it puts your worries into perspective. If you're very much in your own bubble and you just see your whole world as your day-to-day life, the worries can seem very big, but when you take yourself out and zoom out, it kind of makes them smaller.
Oh, absolutely. And, you know, you raised so many really interesting points with that comment. One is that when you do, whether it's sailing or hiking or long distance mountain bike riding, but, you know, when you're doing this for more than a week, your world becomes really small. The world is really big, but your world is really small. The only things you really need to worry about today are where I'm going, where I'm going to sleep, have I got enough food to get there, and where am I going to get water on the way. Obviously, those things are a little bit different on a boat. On a boat, it's what is the weather doing today, and where's my next anchorage. But essentially, your responsibilities really then are just to do what it takes to get there without creating mayhem on the way, you know, like without having an impact on your environment, whether that's following leave no trace protocols or whatever your philosophy is, but, you know, to get there without causing harm to yourself or anything else. And when you come back from something like that, one of the things that you really struggle with, there are lots of things you struggle with when you come back from those sorts of things, but one of the things is just how much stuff you deal with in your normal life and how many things you have to manage. When you do a long distance hike in your backpack, the only things that are in your backpack are the things that you use every day or the things that you need to be safe, which you might not require every day, but you might need one day. And there's nothing else in there. So you're only managing the things that you absolutely need to survive from day to day. When I look around, I don't have a lot of stuff because I move regularly, and I usually sell everything to do an adventure and then, you know, buy everything back again on Facebook Marketplace or Gumtree or whatever it is. But I just look around and there's just so much stuff. And the first week I came back to Australia after my hike and moved into a little unit, a villa, because I've got dogs, so I always need a yard. But I locked my keys in the house twice in the first week, and that's just because there were just too many things to remember to grab every time I left the house. And even when I did my when I drove around Australia, or not around the whole of Australia, but drove part of Australia with my dogs, I remember I took a photo of my one key and said, you know, your life's really simple when you only have one key.
You know, the things you listed off when you're on an adventure, it strips it back to just basic human survival necessities. And we fill our lives with so much, let's just call it stuff, as you say. And that's, I think it complicates things for us. It makes our minds very busy when actually, when you're just trying to get from A to B in a particular way, you're just stripping it right back, aren't you?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
you're really just focused on your needs. I mean, certainly other things come into play, both hiking and on the yacht, for example. You were also focused on where other people were, you know, in spatial context to you, because you hoped that you would see people that whose company you enjoyed and have opportunities for exchange. I remember after I flipped past the Sierra, that's called a flip-flop when you don't do a linear hike. When I flipped past the Sierra, I was hiking north, and some other people who'd flipped further north and were hiking south back towards the Sierra. When I could tell from our posts that our paths were about to cross, oh my goodness, I was so excited that I was going to see them. So we hiked only the first week or so together, but stayed in touch all through the desert section. And then when I knew that we were going to cross in the opposite direction, I was really, really excited. And the relationships that you make on these sorts of adventures are really deep and strong. They're more than just a passing association. The depth of the relationship doesn't really reflect the amount of time that you've spent together. And I think it's from a combination of things. I can't speak for everyone, but for myself, my heart is wide open when I do these things. I'm also in a position of humility because I don't know if I'm going to be able to do it. I'm usually not as experienced as other people who are doing it, and I don't know if I've got what it takes. So certainly not positioning myself as any kind of expert, and I'm really open to advice and experience from other people. You pass or you come into contact with people from a range of different backgrounds and lifestyles that are very different to yours, and very different probably also to your circle of friends, and you're much more open to that in that kind of environment. And it was the same on the yacht. If you sailed into a bay and you saw a boat that you recognized, and they were people that you'd met before, and yachting's very social. Every night in the hour before sunset you have sundowners. Either other people come to your boat or you go to other people's boats, and even you often don't even share anything other than conversation, because most people are only carrying enough food to feed themselves. But you take a few some cheese and salami and some crackers over or something, or on the trail you sit down, prepare your meal together before you collapse into your tent at night. And they're really, really important times. So when you talk about just what you need, and even about feeling alone or feeling small and insignificant, or alone and insignificant, it's not about, the social connections are still also really important. And I think about people who do long distance adventures where they are really alone, and listening to Lisa Blair talk about her circumnavigation, and she talked about a period of time where she was unable to be in contact with people she was using Iridium Go, which is a way of turning your mobile phone into a satellite phone, and the system wasn't working for a few days, and she was unable to stay in touch with people she normally stayed in touch with, and she suddenly felt really disconnected. And so that even when you're away from other people, you can still feel connected through social networks or through communication devices and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would like to finish off by giving you the floor to share one thing that you think everyone would benefit from knowing.
Oh my goodness, I was not prepared for this.
Don't worry, everyone always says that.
I think the thing that I think people would benefit from knowing is that they are really powerful, that we are powerful creatures. We have just an incredible physiology and intelligence to do things, and even things that we don't think we can do. And I guess part of that knowing is that you'll have fears, and that's fine, but don't let fear stop you from doing something. If other people are doing it and they're not dying like flies, you can probably do it too. So it's there and it's waiting for you, and you have, I really believe that most of us really do have what it takes. And if you've got physical limitations, look around you, because there are other people doing things with physical limitations as well, whether it's, I mentioned that I was overweight when I hiked the Pacific Crest Trail. So, there are people. There's a guy called Second Chance Hiker. He's a very overweight man, and he didn't hike the whole trail, but he hiked a lot of the trail. Imagine if he didn't hike any of it because he thought he was, too overweight to hike. And when I say a couple, they're not a couple as in a romantic relationship, but they're a pair of hikers where, I'll try and get this right, he's blind and she has a physical disability where she's very tiny, like it's not dwarfism, but and she can't walk. So he carries her on his back, and she's his eyes and he's her legs. And they're just an amazing pair. They hike some really, really challenging terrain together. And, what an incredible trust-based relationship they have. And, there are people overcoming all sorts of challenges and maximising what they have. And their skills and abilities, often by teaming up with other people. So if there's anything you want to do, I believe that there is a way that you can probably do it.
That is a wonderful sentiment to leave us with. Thank you. Thank you very much. And where can we find you on the internet? If anyone would like to sort of get in touch or perhaps find out a little bit more about some of your adventuring, where could we find you?
The best place at the moment is to find the Facebook group Wildly Inspiring Community. That's my Facebook group. That'll build into my podcast eventually. I do have a Facebook page called Wildly Inspiring, but it's not really in use yet. That will become more active when I launch the podcast. But Wildly Inspiring Community is active every day, and from there they can send me a message on Facebook Messenger. Is perhaps the easiest way to get in touch right now. And I'd love to hear from anyone who would like any encouragement to undertake their own adventures, whatever they are. I'd love to be able to assist.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Stephanie. It's been a fascinating conversation. I have no doubt people are going to be inspired by it. So thank you very much for your time today.
Thanks very much, Victoria. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for listening to episode 19 of the Live Fit Now podcast. I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Stephanie as much as I did. I think we can all leaving a little bit inspired and know that it's never too late to start adventuring. We would love to hear if you have been on any adventures yourself, or perhaps you've been inspired to start planning one of those adventures on your to-do list. You can get in touch via the show notes, through social media, or pop us an email. We really would love to hear from you. Please do share with your family and friends, whether that be on social media or of course word of mouth. And if you could leave a review and subscribe to the channel, you will be the first to know about the next episodes. Until the next time.